to go live. Again, I'll put it in the chat. You'll see. Okay, looks like we're live now.
All right.
Go ahead and kick it off, guys.
Hey, what's going on, Representative Williams? How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I'm glad we can have this conversation tonight.
Yes, sir. Just to set the stage for the audience, I want people to know that this is a true first meetup. We have not came together and devised any kind of agenda or topics. We want to genuinely get to know each other live in front of everybody who's watching, and we are going to have an open, honest, and authentic conversation. So everything you guys hear today will be organic and natural, and not contrived or set up. So I want to start with just some introductions, and Rep. Williams, if I may, I'm gonna call you Josh. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Representative Josh Williams. I represent District 44, which is the surrounding areas around Toledo and Northwest Ohio. I'm serving in my second term in the Ohio House. I also serve as Majority Whip and House Leadership for the 136th General Assembly. I'm also a college professor. I teach constitutional law, and I'm a practicing criminal defense attorney as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. This conversation started with, Senate Bill 1, the passage of Senate Bill 1, the debates we had on the floor and through social media. And I saw an open letter that you posted, which, was a little critical of my position, but at the same time, I could tell it was inquisitive.
Yeah.
You actually had an open mind and was trying to understand where I was coming from as a Black man in America. And that's why I reached out and said, I'm open to have a conversation in public or in private, however you want to do it. Just set it up and I'd be there. And that got us to where we are tonight.
I appreciate that. My name is Jared Grandy. I am a local Dayton resident. I spent time working for civil rights organizations such as the Urban League, volunteered with organizations such as NAACP. I spent a lot of my time in my career working as the community police relations coordinator for the city of Dayton. And there I got a chance to speak with everybody from local residents to state legislators about community police policy, naturally that delve into law and policy and culture and the things that were impacting people on a daily basis. After I left the city of Dayton, I got into a kind of a life of activism. I continued writing and thinking and blogging, going to protests, writing open letters like the one I wrote to you. That's how we got here. And again, like you, I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. Black man to Black man, come to some understanding, discuss how we got how we arrived to the conclusions that we did with regard to some of our beliefs and some of our policies and even some of our politics. So with that being said, you've shared a powerful story. I've heard you share a powerful story with regard to how you overcame, got to law school and got eventually where you are today. And I'm gonna ask you to share that story here.
Yeah, so I mean, I was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. My dad was 68 when I was born. He was born in 1915 in Tunica, Mississippi, in the Jim Crow South, and came up here for a better life, and eventually met my mom. And I have two older siblings, and my dad died when I was 5 from cancer, and I was raised by a single mom in the inner city in poverty, real horrible conditions. Eventually, we made our way out by the University of Toledo, where it was a more diverse culture. I started excelling in school and was on a good path, but dropped out of high school at the age of 18 when I became homeless. Slept on park benches and friends' couches for about 6 months. Met the mother of my first son. We got our own place together, and I started working for the railroad as a subcontractor, and I thought life was good. And at the age of 21, I fell 30 feet and destroyed my spine. By the age of 23, I was fully disabled and bedridden. From there, for the next 6 years, I laid in bed, had over 40 procedures done on my body, 5 major procedures on my spine, including metal being put in my spine. And at one point, I even reached 458 pounds at my heaviest, and went through a bunch of surgeries, including weight loss surgery, lost the weight, got back partially healthy, and wanted to get out of that bed. And we fought with the state of Ohio for me to be able to go to college. And I enrolled in college at the age of 30 as a freshman at the University of Toledo. And at the age of 35, I graduated from law school with my third degree, my Juris Doctorate, became a practicing attorney, a college professor, and a couple years later ran for state representative and was sworn in, in 2023, serving my first term.
Why did you have to fight so hard to go to college?
So I'm an injured worker. So in the state of Ohio, if you're an injured worker and you collect disability, if you try to enroll in college without the state of Ohio's permission, they will cut off your disability. And they threatened to do that with me.
Mhm.
They wanted me just to go work a minimum wage job, and they would pay me the difference between the wages I was making at the railroad and that minimum wage job for 5 years. And then they said I should be used to minimum wage, and they would cut off my disability entirely. And so we fought for a year
Yeah.
for the ability to go and get a form of vocational rehabilitation so I can make a livable wage. And eventually they backed down. They gave permission for me to go to college for 2 years, as long as someone else paid for tuition.
Mhm.
And a non-governmental organization called Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities paid my first 2 years tuition and books. And once I got there, there was kind of no turning back. I started working part-time, going to school part-time, or actually full-time. Took every credit I could every semester, never took summers off, and was able to get my associates and bachelor's in 3 years and my law degree in 2.5 years, and be able to move on with my life. And I got to a point where I was a successful practicing attorney, and there was just something calling me to do something better and make an impact on people's lives more than just one case at a time. And that's why I ran to be an elected official.
When you was young, Josh, in the inner city of Toledo, would anybody expect you to be where you are today? Would anybody expect a young black man from the inner city to go on and earn a law degree and eventually become a representative representing the people? If you shake your head, no, why not? Why don't you think people would have expected that from you?
Like we wasn't raised that way. Like, I mean, I was raised in real poverty. Like I had dead roaches surgically removed from my ears and caused permanent hearing loss because of the conditions I was in. I was raised with a family that had a mindset of survival. You couldn't aspire and dream to be a lawyer when you needed to pay the rent every month and you needed to put gas in the car every day so you can get back and forth to work. I was raised to go out and get a job and be able to provide for yourself and not be a burden on the system, and that's it. There was no dreams of aspiring to be more. It wasn't, it's hard to say this, but I suffered a debilitating injury, but that reset my life. It gave me a chance to sit back for a couple years and actually dream of what I would do in my life if I ever got healthy. So when I got healthy, it was like I wasn't wasting one moment, man. I was literally taking every class, every credit, every semester. When other kids are complaining about homework, I'm excited because I'm like, dude, I've been laying in bed for 6 years. Like I got the chance to learn. I'm gonna excel, and I did. I mean, I graduated with my bachelor's degree with honors. I graduated magna cum laude with a 3.85 GPA, earned a full scholarship to UT Law, and went and excelled in law school. And it was just because my mindset kind of shifted along the way, man, that there's no excuse for me not to try hard.
Do you think without that injury, you would have been able to arrive to the mindset that you currently have?
No, I think without that injury, I would have just been a regular blue, and there's nothing wrong with this, but I just would have been a regular blue collar worker. I was working at the railroad. I was 21, making $50,000 a year with a family of five. I had two-step kids, my son, my wife. She didn't work. I was providing. We lived in the inner city of Toledo at 309 Dexter. One of my kids was going to private school through a voucher. Another one was going to a public high school. I was concentrating on my kids having a better life, not me.
Yeah.
So I would have kept just grinding to pay
I feel
bills.
you. I feel you. I grew up on 1948 Rugby Road on the west side of Dayton, Ohio. I imagine that that my hood was very similar to your hood in Toledo, and we were surrounded by, like you said, crime, poverty. I also once remember living in a house with roaches. I also have experienced housing insecurity, couch surfing. I also got caught up in a lifestyle to a certain extent. Thank God I was able to avoid the prison system, but most of my oldest friends wasn't able to avoid that fate, right? And the reason I bring up, the west side of Dayton, the inner city of Toledo, I don't think those places became those places by accident, right? And I have my like theories and based on my education as to why those places exist and the ways they do exist. But I would love to hear from you. Why do you think that, you know, the hood is the same anywhere you go in Ohio and probably America?
That's probably because the same systems was put in place to create them. You know, we had a good time. I don't want to say a good time, but we had a period of time where the Black community was thriving, even though we were still on the back end of prejudice and oppression. You know, we had two-parent households that were able to generate wealth for the family. We had whole Black communities building up Black generational wealth outside of, blending into the greater society because we had segregation at the time. But, you know, I can be long-winded on this, but I've spoken about this, I've written about this. You know, it was the Black empowerment movement of the 1960s that made Hoover's FBI look at the Black community as a national security threat. And there was policies that were intentionally put in place to dissolve the nuclear Black family because it was two-parent Black households that funded SNCC and CORE and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Medgar Evers, and this is all declassified information, and there was concerted efforts to dissolve that funding base for the Black empowerment movement, which was the two-parent Black households. So then we deindustrialized the inner city schools, took out our workforce development programs, we introduced crack cocaine into the inner cities. We weaponized the welfare system that had been around since the 1930s to benefit people that didn't look like us, and we turned it into a no man in the household policy. That intentionally dissolved the Black family and put us in a cycle of perpetual governmental reliance for subsistence. And that's what got us to where we are now. And I look at every governmental policy through that lens of whether or not it's helping us overcome that. We can't deny the history.
Right.
The question is whether or not the programs and policies are helping us offset that now, or whether or not it's just continuing to ingrain a system that's going to keep us held back from our non-Black peers moving forward. And that's where that's what I analyze SB1 through when we get to that conversation.
Yeah.
And that's how I look through all policy that's going to deal with the Black community.
Yeah, I mean, fair point. I've heard that point many times, right? Like the destruction of the nuclear family is the thing that you can point to uh, as the cause of some of the conditions that we suffer in the Black community. But I also wonder, you know, what role does systemic racism play? What role did redlining play, right? And I'm sure for people who don't know, redlining was the practice in which uh, banks decided that they wouldn't loan in certain areas, therefore crippling the investment in those areas and the ability for those areas to thrive, right? We had segregation, as you mentioned. We had in the South Jim Crow laws, and in the North we didn't have them officially on the books, but there were unofficial policies that resembled Jim Crow laws and a culture that promoted segregation and the unequal distribution of resources. And so while I don't, I'm not opposed to the nuclear family, obviously, right? I do see the benefits of it, but I wonder if we overestimate or give that we give that fact that the nuclear family doesn't exist at the same rate as our white counterparts. We look to that as the reason, and I'm wondering if it plays as big as a role as some people believe it does.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't deny any of the things that you brought up. I didn't intend to make it seem like that was the sole reason for the conditions that we are in. I was just highlighting, part of the historical context that got us to the place that we are now. I mean, part of it was redlining initially that kept us inside of inner cities once we migrated up north. And weren't able to go to the suburbs and affluent white communities, and they tried to keep us out of their schools. And yeah, that definitely had a role in kind of creating the idea of Black communities. But you got to remember, while that was all going on, we had Black communities that were thriving.
Yeah.
We had some Black Wall Street. I was just watching a documentary about another black city that was, these black men were forming the first airport ever during segregation times. The first black aviator was forming a commercial a runway, and they were having plan, and he had a white partner that was planning on helping thrive the city around that development. So at the same time, we were thriving, even in those instances where we were segregated into black communities only. We were thriving. The problem really came when you dissolve the economic base of the family unit. And then one, we started relying on government assistance, and two, even if we weren't on government assistance, we were relying on low income housing, which were predominantly in, rundown areas of the inner cities. And that's how we got to the areas that we are now. And I haven't seen those economic conditions really change, even though inflation, continues to grow. As much as I do, it's very hard to survive on a one income household, especially trying to raise children in today's society. You're going to be stuck in areas that have lower rent and lower mortgage rates, and that's resulted in us being kind of consolidated into our major metropolitan areas.
Yeah.
I just look at policies that try to offset that. So like when we talk about redlining, I introduced and got passed and signed by the governor House Bill 234, a Home Buyer Protection Act. That was the first anti-discrimination home buyer bill in Ohio in decades. That mandated that there was at least mandatory disclosures to sellers of what the federal laws were and the potential penalties on discrimination. I started out with a stronger bill, trying to redact off names of individuals off of offer sheets, because just your name can indicate race. That kind of was an uphill battle that we weren't able to win in the legislature, but I was able to get us some win that says at least we're going to highlight to you what the potential penalties are if you're caught discriminating in the home buying process. So like I'm trying to attack those issues. It's an uphill battle, and we got to be smart about how we do it. And that's what kind of got us to the conversation we're having tonight about, whether or not certain policies do benefit us or don't benefit us, and what's the harm of removing some of the policies we believe that benefit us.
Right. Yeah, you bring up a good point. And then you bring up a really good point about there were people who were thriving. I don't want to give everybody a history lesson, and I definitely don't need to give you a history lesson, right? We could talk about the Reconstruction era and how Black people thrive, particularly during that Reconstruction era. We could talk about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we could talk about what happened to that. But one thing that comes to mind anytime I think about those instances where there were a group of Black people who seem to thrive no matter what is going on, right? Even to this day, there are Black people who are thriving regardless of any of the systemic oppression that we speak of, right? And I think of the movie, for example, 12 Years a Slave, and the main character, before he was captured and tricked into becoming being trapped into slavery and kidnapped and forced to work as an enslaved person, he was thriving, right? Harriet Tubman would not have been able to be a conductor on an underground railroad if there wasn't already a Black contingent of people thriving, particularly in the Philadelphia area. And so what I'm getting at is the presence of some Black people thriving doesn't necessarily negate the fact that there are a lot of Black people who live in a tremendously oppressive system. And I bring up the 12 Years a Slave examples because, while he was thriving, there was a whole, millions of people in the South who suffered under the institution of slavery. And so do you think, that's a long-winded way to ask the question, do you think the nuclear family could by itself conquer or overcome the systems that are in place that tend to be oppressive?
Yeah, I mean, so I want to be clear. Like, I don't believe that we face the same systems that we did back then.
Okay.
I think there's still remnants of those systems that are in place, and it's more because I want to draw a distinction. So there's a distinction between systematic racism, where there's a system that's intentionally put in place to discriminate, and systemic racism, which is that a system was put in place and as a byproduct, there's discrimination. So I don't think a lot of systems exist anymore that are intentionally put in place to discriminate against Black people. I think there's still remnants of prior systems that are contributing to discrimination against Black people, or at least disproportionate outcomes for Black people. And that's where you have the, systemic versus systematic racism. So, I mean, I want to just, our history is our history, and we can't deny that. But we also got to look at our history now compared to other minority groups. So are there other minority groups that are coming here and being successful, even though they also get discriminated against based off of the color of their skin? Their discrimination may be different than ours. We have a long, deeply rooted discrimination in history that goes back to the founding of our nation.
Yeah.
I don't deny that whatsoever. But when I look at economic outcomes of families, like there's a chart that you can look at on median income based off of race, and white is not at the top and Black is all the way at the bottom. But what you see is you see a bunch of Indian Americans, Chinese Americans, right, at the very, very top. And what there's another graph that shows the correlation between their marriage rate and their success. And some of those communities have marriage rates in the 97, 98 percentile. And then ours is really, really low. So do I think it's just, nuclear Black family is the way to get out of this? No, it's just one piece of the puzzle, right? It's one piece of the puzzle. We have to have the ability to have a two-parent household that generates enough income so you can afford that house in the suburbs, and then go see if you get discriminated when you go out there. I mean, I don't brag about being successful. I overcame poverty and disability, and I met a beautiful Black queen that makes her own money, and together we were able to move from where I lived in Oregon, which is a suburb of Toledo, where I lived there with my son, and into Sylvania Township, which is a more affluent, previously redlined area. And my wife, when we were looking for houses, we looked and we saw this iconic house in Sylvania Township that everyone knows. And it's an older style house on a main street. And it was a piece of our pride that said, we were going to put in an offer on that house. We want this iconic house that's previously redlined to be owned by two Black professionals. And we put in an offer, and God willing, it was accepted. And we moved in, and we were featured in the Sylvania magazine as this couple, me as an elected official, my wife, in the role that she worked in corporate and now being a realtor and in other positions. And we were hoping to be a shining example for that. Yes, we have that history, but can we also, put ourselves in a position to overcome that history? Can we put ourselves in a position with our credit score and our income and our debt to income ratio? And the answer is yes. Now, can we also at the same time put in programs that incentivize lenders to lend to us? Yeah, you can use special purpose credit programs through mortgage companies that I'm trying to incentivize them to give loans to Black couples to move in previously redlined areas. There's programs that can be put in place, but then there's right ways and wrong ways to do it. And and this is, we can get into this. Some of the programs that have been put in place, it doesn't benefit us, but they use us as a scapegoat for it being in existence. And that's where Senate Bill 1 came from. And I can explain that in detail.
Yeah, I definitely want to get to Senate Bill 1. Before we get there, though, again, as I hear your story, it's extremely impressive, right? You extremely industrious, extremely intelligent, right? There is always the exceptional few amongst us, and I don't care what community, what ethnicity we're talking about, right? There's always a group of exceptional people who are able to rise to the top regardless of what barriers are placed in front of them. And again, if you are as bright as you are, or if you are as lucky as I have been, I can't afford to not live in the same inner city that I grew up in, right? You can afford not to live in the same inner city that you grew up in, but I wonder, what do we do for those people who are, most people by definition are average, right? So which means that, most people are going to live in the environment that is created for them through these laws and these policies and through the culture. And I'm wondering, what can we do as a person who's actually representing a district, as a person who advocates for our rights and the elevated standard of living? What can we do to elevate the standard of living for those who aren't as lucky as we have been?
Yeah, so the easiest answer that I can give you is some of the programs that I've helped establish here in the state of Ohio, which is workforce development related. So a lot of the things that hold us back is that we don't naturally have the marketable skills to go out and demand higher wages.
Yeah.
Back in the civil rights times, we did, because the schools used to be industrialized, right? The businesses wanted to generate workers that were able to work in those industries. So, our grandparents, our parents were able to graduate from high school with certificates in plumbing and carpentry and welding and nursing and things of that nature, and go right into the industry right out of high school, get together, get married at a young age, and be able to build that nuclear family. And that's what I'm talking about. And now we've gotten away from that to where for a long time, the government was disincentivizing that blue collar work. Instead, it was either putting our kids in schools that were not really teaching them to be prepared to go off to college or go into that workforce right out of high school. And it was tricking them into going into college, even though they were what you call an average kid that may not be able to excel at college or get a meaningless degree that's not going to even allow them to generate an income more than they could have got as a pipe fitter or a welder. So now there's a huge emphasis by government, especially here in the state of Ohio under our guidance, to get those workforce development programs back into our high schools, but that's not good enough. We have programs that we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in every year that give free training for marketable skills to individuals. One is called IMAP, Individual Micro Accreditation Program. It's spreading across the state of Ohio. In my first year in the General Assembly, I worked with the Department of Development to make it where before it was only people that were low income, unemployed, or underemployed that was eligible for these programs. We made it where it was all Ohioans. And the reason I say that is, let's say we got, a black man that's making $40,000 a year. He was ineligible to try and go get a 6-month certificate where he could be making $80,000 a year. So we wanted to open that up to even individuals that were surviving on their own without government assistance, but weren't thriving yet. To go and get that type of marketable skills in certain areas of the industry, to be able to get that for free, no student loan debt, and be able to move up either in the job that he's in or transition to another company and be able to gain more economic value for his labor. And that's how you can build economic wealth over time. Now, trust me, it's not a light switch that we can just flip and everybody becomes empowered. But what it does for me, I look at the way that I overcame, and my answer is not everybody's answer, but what my way was when I was prepared to take control of my own life. Because, dude, I was a knucklehead in high school. I dropped out because I was out here ripping and running, smoking weed and girls, and I had so many reasons why I didn't take advantage of me being an intelligent guy, and dropped out of high school. And then I got disabled because I was working heavy labor. I realized that when I was prepared to dig myself out, there was programs that were put in place that helped me because I was disabled. I was only eligible for because I was disabled. So I'm going back and looking at my history and saying, well, how can I make those programs available for everyone? And see if, I was only supposed to go to school for a 2-year certificate, making $50,000 a year as a paralegal. Once I got there, I started to see if I get a bachelor's and then I go be a lawyer, I can make this. And that's the stepping stone that I want to introduce all Ohioans to, which is you might have thought, you working in this small factory for $15 an hour is the best you can do because, you might be making more than your parents ever did or your cousins ever did. But if you get this credential, you could be making $35 an hour. And people don't think they can go to college later in life. I want to show people that these programs that are out here, that if you are able-bodied, motivated Ohioan that want to help dig yourself out of those situations and offset some of the harmful effects of systemic and systematic racism that we've faced over the years, here's some policies that's put in place to help you. Now, if you want to sit at home, and I'm going to use some harmful language, but if you want to sit at home and cry on the couch about what we went through and not make any progress for our community or for yourself, you get left behind. And at some point, the question is, do we give handouts to individuals just because of what happened in the past, or do we give a hand up? And I continue to introduce bills that try to give a hand up. So even though I climbed out of poverty, I'm in the inner city, even though I don't represent that district. I'm trying to give a hand up to people. I'm going handing out flyers about the programs that I'm putting in place to go and get free training. When 1,800 workers got laid off from the Jeep plant, I sent my brother into the plant with flyers advertising free training. Hey, while you laid off for 6 months, go get this training as a backup plan. You know what I'm saying? You can have a side hustle doing plumbing and carpentry and electrical and HVAC, you know, and build a side job or a side business. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
a good
and that's
solution.
real, bro. Like, and so where it gets real difficult, Josh, is like when we talk about like when you tell your own story, you had a moment where you were motivated and your eyes were open. It was this kind of come to Jesus moment. Again, I had that same thing, right? I had this. I graduated with a 1.4, right? Like I barely graduated. Same thing, smoking, drinking, hopping. I got my girlfriend pregnant before I even graduated high school, right? And obviously the ability to take advantage of my intellect was there.
Yeah.
But to your point, one, the opportunity isn't presented to people, black people in particularly, especially young black men, right? Unless they already see some potential in you, or unless they already deem you a star, you usually don't get grabbed up, and you usually don't be put into that pipeline. Matter of fact, you get put into a different pipeline, which
Yeah.
is the school to prison pipeline. Thank God both of us were able to avoid that. But again, I just wonder about the young people, the young black people specifically, who aren't, one, presented that choice, and two, kind of um without significant intervention, uh don't even know that they can make a different choice.
So we're trying, like I'm telling you, and I don't want to seem like I got all the solutions in the world. I'm just trying to display to you, because we're going to talk about Senate Bill 1 in a
Yeah.
second here. We're already 30 minutes in.
Yeah.
But like I try to find solutions for those problems. So we have a bill that we introduced with my buddy and fellow majority whip Nick Santucci called the GRAD Act.
Hmm.
That's a bill that's a what we call exit orientation program in junior and senior year of your high school that will almost be like a job fair, a 2-day job fair on site, where you'll be introduced to not only universities and military service, but now we have private entities coming in, labor unions coming in, showing you that you can get this journeymanship and this apprenticeship right out of high school. You don't need no college degree to make $27 an hour laying brick. You can, this company over here has jobs that's available. If you go get this little certificate during the summer, of your junior year, you can start working as a senior. So we're creating programs that give the kids the information. That's the first step of the GRAD Act. The second step of the GRAD Act is to do it for anybody when they enroll in public assistance, that they would have entry orientation that would show them everything that's available to them right now, from free trainings to employment opportunities that's available, to how to file for FAFSA for student loans, to how to enroll in military service if you want to, everything that's available to you. So the idea is, and I agree with you, government comes out with 1,000 programs that make politicians like myself feel warm and fuzzy on the inside that we drew something up on paper.
Hmm.
Nobody knows about it. At the end of the year, the money's still sitting there. It goes in our rainy day fund.
Hmm.
I'm a little different. I want to force the information out into the community. So where do I got kids that they have to absorb the information that I'm giving them in school? So
Yeah.
I'm gonna give it in the 11th and 12th grade year. Then the next stage is Phase 2 of GRAD Act is do it on public when you enroll in public assistance and in your 7th and 8th grade year. So before you even get to high school, you become aware of what opportunities are available. So you may start planning your classes that you pick in a high school to get better skills. And you might take that welding class as a freshman or sophomore, because in your mind, you're like, I'm gonna go be a pipe fitter later on. I want to get this skill. So that's the way that I plan on trying to help. And that's what I think we can do as a state. And it's not based on, now we can be race conscious when we do it, because we know we're trying to help people overcome, but we can't be race specific when we do it, because we're a government entity and we're not allowed to do that. So
Hmm.
that's where you got to have policies that, people be like, what are you doing for Black people? And then I tell them these policies that I just told you, and they're like, but that ain't specific for us.
Hmm.
I can't do that. The courts have said it. The Constitution says I can't do that. But what I can do is target things towards areas where we disproportionately are.
Yeah.
So if I tell you right now, I'm gonna do a program where I give you a scholarship if you come from a single mother household, you're a first generation college student, and you live in the inner city of our 7 major metropolitan cities here in the state of Ohio. Disproportionately is gonna be Black applicants that's filing for that. Now,
Right.
did I need to make a Black scholarship, or do I just need to tailor make a scholarship that goes into the categories that we over represented? You see what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's the intent to help Black people at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so yeah, so that's a great segue into SB1. Let's talk about it. I know you caught a lot of heat and a lot of flack for SB1 to say the least, but I want to just have to understand your point of view and why you advocated for the bill.
Yeah, so I mean, I encouraged the viewers. I gave a 16-minute speech on the floor that really went into a lot of detail about my background and why, I believe DEI is really harmful towards us in our movement in Black empowerment here in the state of Ohio, and why it had to be removed from our institutions of higher learning. The number one reason is because the courts are indicating that we have to remove this now. So, starting back in the 1970s, the court kind of turned a blind eye to what we called at the time affirmative action in admissions.
Right.
That you could kind of give extra emphasis towards getting Black people on the college campuses as a way of offsetting past economic and social harms from systemic and systematic racism. The court said, yeah, this kind of violates the 14th Amendment's Equal Protections Clause, but we're going to let it go because it has a laudable goal, but we're going to monitor this very closely. That happened in the 70s. It increased Black enrollment in colleges. Then we started getting into later decisions in the 90s where too much emphasis was being placed on race. That the court kind of said, listen, you can't let somebody into college just because they're Black, but you can use race as part of a holistic approach in your admissions process. And they said, but we're going to be careful. I know what you guys are trying to do. You said you were trying to offset past harms to a specific group. We're going to start monitoring this and monitoring the enrollment of Black people in colleges. And we think the most you should get is 25 more years to accomplish this goal. That was in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we saw since 2003 was a push for DEI. And I'm going to be frank with you. DEI was created in the minds of woke left liberals to co-opt the affirmative action movement that was benefiting Black people. It went from, we're not going to put in policies that benefit Black people. We're going to put in policies that benefit all groups that we see as worthy of this victimhood status. It started making the agenda so broad that it was indistinguishable from affirmative action in the past. And the court noted that in 2023 in the Students for Fair Housing, the Students for Fair Admissions case, where they said, essentially, you have no goals anymore. Before it was Black representation on campus in the enrollment process. Now you just say diversity benefits everybody. That's not a goal that the court can measure, and therefore it won't pass strict scrutiny. So that's the legal reason why DEI had to go. Then there's other parts to it where DEI was just a way of kind of reinforcing racial stereotypes on college campuses. I showed that on the floor where we saw studies from Harvard where white students said they believe in the DEI policies and race-based admissions because it reinforced their idea that as a white student, they got there based off of their merits, and Black students got there based off of DEI, and they thought we couldn't compete with them academically, so they were preserving their class ranking by letting more Black people on campus. This was in a study from Harvard's own Crimson newspaper. So that was some of the reasons why I realized that DEI had to be removed from college campuses, and especially because college campuses started forcibly indoctrinating students to where you had to have this certain viewpoint as it relates to LGBTQ issues, gender issues, racial issues, and you didn't have the ability as a student to have free speech on campus anymore. And that's what Senate Bill 1, most of Senate Bill 1 was trying to accomplish.
Gotcha. Josh, so you made the distinction between affirmative action and DEI, and I always thought that DEI was basically a rebrand of affirmative action. But correct me if I'm wrong. You don't seem to be against affirmative steps that kind of minimize the harm of the systemic racism that we both acknowledge exists, right? There's a systemic racism as you define, it is to still the barriers, I mean, the remnants of the systematic racism that existed in the past, right? And so we know we're still dealing with these remnants, and we need something to help propel us
Yeah.
over those obstacles that those remnants create.
Yeah, I mean, I realize the history and I realize the results that we're still trying to overcome now.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the problem was DEI hurt our cause, by literally taking DEI where you were trying to all of a sudden benefit every group but Black people. Essentially, the leftists, and I'll be frank on party affiliation, the modern Democrat tried to stand on the shoulders of the civil rights movement and build this DEI program, and now they want to scream foul when the whole thing comes crumbling down and Black people are harmed by it. So here's the distinction. So affirmative action, the court said, even when it came to like Black representation in private employment, when it came to giving preferential treatment to Black contractors through government contracts, all of that the court allowed affirmative action, they also said that it was limited in time, that they were gonna turn the blind eye for a short amount of time to help us offset past wrongs. So by DEI jumping on the backs of the affirmative action movement, the courts now said, look, we tried to turn the blind eye to race-based classifications. You guys took it so far that we have to take action now. And that's why it's all falling apart. So they're not going to allow us to take a step back and say, whoa, wait a minute. Now let's reinstate some parts that was really good parts. What we have to do is we have to shift our focus to say, how can we come up with programs that help Black people, but at the same time doesn't discriminate or distinguish based on race? And that's an example that I gave you earlier of, putting programs in place. I'll give you an example. Donald Trump signed a piece of legislation into law, but there was a Black member of the Senate that actually pushed that legislation through, and that was for opportunity zones. It was $500 billion that was invested in inner cities called opportunity zones. Now, did it say that he had to invest $500 billion in inner city Black communities, or did they put criteria around the opportunity zones that made it where the majority of the money were going to be invested in Black communities?
Right.
That's a way that we can do it without putting Black as the label. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's where our focus has to shift from outrage that one political party is going to use to try to keep our vote. Because you got to understand, there is one group in America that benefits by us staying in poverty. And that's the group that provides public assistance and always threatens that the other side is going to take it away. They benefit from holding us back and keeping us in perpetual poverty because they're buying for our vote. But there's another group that wants our vote, that is open and honest and listening to the community and saying, what can we do to help you, without distinguishing that it's specifically only to help you. And that's where we need people to say, hey, if you came up with a program that looks like this, it'll help us, but it'll help everybody. But disproportionately, it'll help us. And that's where we got to focus now.
For sure. If you solve for Black people, you solve for everybody in America, right? The civil rights movement showed us that. I don't have to tell you as a lawyer that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, right, were particularly that they were instituted to benefit newly freed enslaved people, right? And those particular amendments benefit everybody, particularly the 14th Amendment. Again, I don't want to bore people with nerdy legal American jurisprudence. But I agree with you, right? If we solve for Black people, we solve for everybody. That's true in Ohio, that's true in Colorado, that's true in New Mexico, Arizona, California, wherever, right? But I'm also hearing, so I don't think we disagree at all that matter of fact, I know we agree for sure that there needs to be policy, laws, legislation in place that are going to disproportionately, not disproportionately benefit Black people, but are going to benefit Black people by their very nature, by the way they're set up.
Well, you had it right the first time, right? So if you target, so all you got to do is think about the categories that we highlight as this is evidence of systemic and systematic racism because we disproportionately make up these groups, whether it's low income, in poverty, single motherhood, in the criminal justice system. If you just target policies towards those groups,
Yeah.
that means disproportionately is going to help us.
Yeah. And and I think, again, that's why I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I think for the most part, most people agree that there's a particular group in America, there's a particular group in Ohio who needs who needs to be benefited disproportionately because of the historical and systemic barriers that still exist. Some people believe, hold on, let me finish this point real quick. Some people believe that DEI was one of those programs that that was created and designed to, again, mitigate the historical atrocities that we experience and the remnants of which we still experience, right? And so I'm not here to die on a DEI hill, right? I like, if it wasn't a good policy, it's not a good policy, and that's debatable, right? That's definitely debatable whether or not that was a good policy. But I think what upsets people is the idea that we take something away that was designed to benefit people who need the benefit.
But it wasn't designed for that. If that was the end goal, leave affirmative action as it was.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you need to jump on the shoulders of the affirmative action and start screaming from the rooftops about LGBTQ individuals, other marginalized groups, all of this thing? Why did you need to co-opt that movement if it's supposed to be designed to be benefiting Black people specifically? The answer is that was never the intention. The intention was, we see that the courts have allowed preferential treatment towards Blacks because of their history. We think other people should get victimhood status too. Let's figure out a way to co-opt that movement. And on college campuses, white liberal professors that teach critical race theory and critical theory came up with the idea of rebranding this as DEI, and we can move past just Black people into other areas. And that's why on the floor, I showed that this is not even debatable anymore. The number one group that benefited from DEI was left-leaning white women. They disproportionately gained access to corporate rooms, corporate boardrooms, higher level management, and even the chief diversity officer position at Fortune 500 companies, where we only represented 4% of all DEI chief officers in the country, but white women represented disproportionate to their population representation.
Yeah.
So this has been proven. So we can't say that DEI was something that was specifically built to benefit Black people, because if that was true, it wouldn't be needed because affirmative action was already in place.
Which brings me to my next question. Do you think OG affirmative action was fine the way it was, and would you advocate to bring something like that back?
So affirmative action was supposed to be phased out over time.
I think that's a legal argument, but I'm asking.
Yeah, so that's the way the court was going, and getting to the point where we have to do things like we do now, which is abide by the Constitution that says that we can't discriminate based on race. It doesn't say we can't create programs. Mm-hmm. What it says, though, through strict scrutiny, is it says you must have a specific compelling governmental interest, and that the programs or policy or law that you put in place must be narrowly tailored, right, in the least restrictive means to accomplish that compelling governmental interest. It's a very high standard. Mm-hmm. And if we do specific programs, we may be able to get over that hump, but you're going to get challenged in court. So
don't think
it's easier.
My bad. Go ahead. My bad.
It's easier to create programs that have the same outcome without the racial intention. Then you don't even got to face strict scrutiny anymore. Yeah. You face rational basis review.
I mean, you can't deny that this particular Supreme Court wouldn't, any affirmative action legislation wouldn't pass strict scrutiny as it would be interpreted by this very court, right? Like at that's undeniable. But I guess what I'm more so getting at, and I think you're answering that question, is, do you still believe in a law or a policy or legislation that gives Black people the leg up they need, considering what we faced?
I can't say the leg up, because that'll be race-based classifications, and I believe that's going to be ruled unconstitutional. I think you can get the same outcome by just drafting it race neutral and targeting it towards groups that are not race-based that we disproportionately make up. So everything from unmarried to single motherhood rate to being in poverty to living in the inner cities, you target those programs towards those areas, and that will disproportionately pick up Black applicants and Black recipients. I don't think you have to use race anymore in order to accomplish those goals, but you're going to have particular groups that want to target race. So I do want to respond to a question by the audience about what's the evidence that DEI was invented by academics and not activists. And that's, you can go back to the early 2000s and see the courses that were being taught on college campuses that literally brought forward this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. This was created on college campuses by actual university professors that studied this and wrote about this for decades before it became mainstream. And their goal was to expand this kind of preferential class beyond that of just Black Americans into other marginalized groups that they saw it as, especially in the early 2000s when we started to push LGBTQ issues here. That was the target of that group. And you got to think about it. If DEI was directly targeted towards Black people, it was unneeded because we had affirmative action that's been rolling since the 70s. Both in college admissions, both in private corporate hiring practices. The court said that that was permitted in limited circumstances to offset past discrimination. When it came to preferential treatment and contract allocation towards minority-owned businesses, the court turned a blind eye to that and said that was allowed in limited circumstances. So those programs were already in place for Black people. So DEI came along and literally tried to hijack that movement, and it resulted in the whole Jenga tower coming down. And I want to explain why Senate Bill 1 was necessary. So when you get that student for fair admissions decision, and the court clearly indicates that they are no longer going to be permitting this race-based classification, at least in the context of admissions and the way it was, that it wasn't narrowly tailored and it wasn't a compelling governmental interest, we have to respond with legislation. And I'll use history as an example. When Plessy versus Ferguson was the law of the land and separate but equal was constitutional, right? And Brown v. Board of Education came across and said, segregation is no longer lawful. You must integrate. There were states that still had laws in their books that required segregation. Legislatures had to act. The judicial branch has no army. Legislatures had to act and pass laws to force integration. And then when local governments refused to abide by those state laws, they sent in the National Guard to walk that little Black girl up the steps and into that white classroom. Right. So it's no different with Senate Bill 1. When the court has responded and said, we're not going to allow these things to happen anymore, the legislature has an obligation to get our statutes in line, or we are going to face lawsuits. And we're seeing that in California, where Asian students are still being denied enrollment to public universities, even though they have perfect SAT scores and 4.5 GPAs. And those Asian groups are now suing all of the public universities in California because California still refuses to comply with the Supreme Court's decision on race-based admissions. So that's why Senate Bill 1 had to come into play.
One of the other things that Senate Bill 1 does, though, is limit the opportunity for Black people. Again, I'm focusing on Black people if people can't tell, right? One of the things it does is limit the opportunity for Black people to understand that history that you speak of, right? The young Black girl being escorted into her school building by the National Guard. I can name a bunch of other historical events that are important and enrich young Black people. I believe that it helps them, one, it educates them, it edifies them, it empowers them. And I do believe those things are necessary for the development of young Black minds. This is my reading of SB 1, is that it limits the opportunity by eliminating African American study programs, institutions with on campus that focus on African American culture and history. And because it does that, it takes away the opportunity for that empowerment.
Yeah, so that's not true. Okay. So it does get rid of DEI departments. It does do that. But what we've taught universities is what that same agenda that was in those DEI departments can be handled by the Black Student Union. You can have a meeting space that student groups can reserve, and they can bring in speakers, and they can bring in individuals that volunteer, or even donations that come into the Black Student Union to host people. But the only part that it did, it said if there are degrees, undergraduate degrees that produce less than 5 degrees, undergraduate, so associates and bachelors, that produce less than 5 students that earn degrees on average over a 3-year period. So over 3 years, an average of 5 per year, then you have to dissolve that program. That's not based on any particular criteria of what type of program. The students are speaking with their enrollment that they're not interested in taking those programs. And what we're seeing is schools spending millions of dollars to prop up those programs that aren't generating any funds for the university because no students are taking those classes. But there is a misnomer that somehow SB1 takes away history, and SB1 has a specific line in it that I made sure got in there. And I noted on my Twitter account at Josh Williams OH. You can look back on those videos, and there's a video that I'm responding to one of my Democrat representatives that tried to use the same argument. And it specifically says in the legislation that nothing in this bill, nothing in this section prohibits debate, discussion, or instruction on any topic, so long as the professor allows the student to maintain intellectual diversity, meaning you don't force the topic down their throat from a slanted perspective. We do not want to ban history or ban students being able to learn history, but let's be clear. If no students are enrolling in a degree that specializes in that, all we did was say, take away that actual degree, not the department. So we just had that at the University of Toledo. One of the degrees that failed was Africana Studies, right? And everyone's like, oh, see, you're trying to get rid of Black history and blah, blah, blah. It wasn't. The university still is maintaining the department, and minors are going to be offered in Africana Studies. You're still going to be able to take electives in that department, but no degree is going to be offered because of the cost of that degree program. So I kind of got to push back about the way you can read Senate Bill 1. That's not the intentions at all.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Because what I want to make clear, though, is I want to give you the opportunity and want to make clear my position that, I'm not going to die necessarily on a DEI hill if it's not particularly benefiting Black people, right? We need a leg up. We need things that work. We need things that law and policy that is actually going to help us overcome some of those historical atrocities and the barriers that systemic racism presents, right? So if it didn't work, it didn't work, right? But I do want to just make sure that we both agree, and it sounds like we do, that it is important that, one, we do know and learn our history, like,
Yeah.
and through these institutions, right? I do believe that institutionally we should be allowed to teach that history, right? I was a proponent for CRT, for example, critical race theory. For those who don't know, I was a proponent of that because I do believe that it was a rigorous and legitimate academic theory that had legs, right? And we could agree to disagree on that, but the point being is what I want to make sure we do agree on is that we believe that Black people deserve the opportunity to learn about their history, what they've been able to overcome. They have the opportunity to get lessons and curriculum that empower them.
Yeah, well, I think it's a little bit more broader. I don't think just Black people should have the opportunity to learn Black history. I think every student should learn Black history and the history of our nation, because that's one way of shaping empathy towards the individuals that had to undergo that history. But there's a difference between teaching history and then trying to teach history with a narrative that you're trying to paint. CRT a little bit. It literally taught that a white kid born today is an oppressor inherently, and that a Black kid born today is inherently oppressed. And I kind of push back against that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to get off topic. I mean, so that's where we're not. Senate Bill 1 was guided towards, and I'm going to clarify because we only got 3 minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
Senate Bill 1 mentioned DEI 10 times, 9 of them were on one single page. Literally, the majority of the bill was about freedom of expression on college campuses. And the greatest example is you can just go watch my Twitter, where I had a 2-hour town hall like this with two of my Democrat colleagues and a professor, and students were able to stand up and ask questions, and we had an open and honest debate like me and you are having right now.
Mhm.
And at the very end, reinforcements were called in. A black member of university staff came in with 7 students and just shut down that panel. Just came in screaming, shut down the entire panel because he didn't want any of my views espoused. And it was crazy. And that was the climate that students are undergoing on college campuses. And that's why Senate Bill 1 was important to say, one, college campuses, you must allow for open and honest dialogue on campus. You must allow students to have their own viewpoints and their own thoughts, and not try to force them to believe something in order to pass a class or in order to just be a student on campus.
So, and I want to end with this. The current political climate is at a fever pitch. We aren't able to have discussions where we aren't able to come to an agreement. And I understand the passion that some people express because they do believe some of the laws that are being passed now are fundamentally denying them their right to exist and thrive in this state and in this country, right? But I don't think where we are going now in this current political climate, I don't think it's sustainable for one, and two, I don't think it's productive. How do we move forward?
I think we move forward by having conversations like this. And when we see people in public trying to shut down somebody just because of their political views, or shut them down because they're wearing a particular hat, or shut them down because they're saying something, as a bystander, we need to speak up. Hey, I might not agree with that man, but he got the right to hold on to his own views. He has that absolute right to wear that hat. He has that absolute right to stand out there and protest at Josh Williams's event. Yeah, I go out there and tell them, hey man, I appreciate y'all being here. Y'all got the right. Y'all need some water or something. Like, I don't shy away from having these discussions, because that's the only way, one, that you can understand the other side's position instead of assuming the reason they believe what they believe. And two, that's the only way that you're going to be able to understand what is the opposite side of your argument, so you can sharpen your own arguments more tightly. I believe steel sharpens steel, and that's why I won't shy away from any debate, discussion, town hall meeting.
Yeah. And with that being, the proof is in the pudding. You're here now. I'm here now. We had this discussion. I hope that we have many more discussions. I know you further up north. I'm down here on the southern tip of Ohio, but I'm sure we'll find a way to talk again. And I appreciate you again having the courage to do this. And I appreciate everybody for tuning in. This was a open, honest, organic conversation. And I think we can have a lot more of them.
I appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion with you. I appreciate the open letter that you wrote that got my attention. And just reach out, man. And I come down to Dayton, we'll break bread.
That's what's up. All right, bro. Take it easy.
Have a good one.